Bambu Studio has a fantastic range of painting tools, so you can paint your model ready for multi-material printing with something like an AMS. However, the colours that you've painted are only ever guaranteed on the surface of your print. It gives you no control over how deep into your model these colours run. In this video, I'm going to be showing you through a simple trick in Bambu Studio that allows you to not only select different colours for different areas of your print, but also define how far into your print you want it to be that colour. So let's get stuck in. As I said, Bambu Studio has a great range of painting tools, but the colour that you're applying with these tools is only ever guaranteed on the surface of your model. The interior of it could be any of the colours that you're using in the entire print, especially if you're flushing to objects infill. This can be problematic if you paint on a light colour and it's printed too thin. If you then have a darker colour in your infill, you may start to see the shapes of that infill bleeding through the semi-transparent outer layer and therefore ruin the aesthetics of your print. Equally, you may want to print a thin, light external layer to then blend with a different colour below it, therefore changing the colour of that section. If you were to print a couple of layers of white over a layer of black, then you're going to see through that white and then it's going to become a grey. In this video, we're going to look at how you can specify the depth that the colour penetrates inside the model. Let's have a look. For the purpose of this video, we don't need a complicated model, so I'm just going to right click on the print bed, go to add primitive and then select cube. With it selected, I'm going to go up to scale and just set it to 20mm cubed, just so we've got a nice round number. With it selected again, if I go up to the paint tool, highlight the other filament and then select the fill tool, I can then fill one side of this cube as white. As you can see, this is an entirely black cube that has just had one flat side painted white. No other painting has been applied to it. If I slice it now, however, and go down through the layers, you can see that there is a triangle of the white filament that has fed into the middle of the model. If you look at the areas where the white and the black filaments meet, there is two sets of perimeter walls, one for each colour. If we now switch this to flush into objects infill mode and slice again, you can now see that this black and white infill is used in both sections, both the black area and the white area. With the white area, you would then start seeing this black infill feeding through this thin external wall. If I jump back into the Prepare tab and then with the cube selected again, select the Paint tool and then this time the Circle brush, then paint on a little section over here, and then if I turn off Flush into Objects Infill just so it's easy to see and slice again, now when I go down through the layers you will see that just this little patch here has also fed quite a deep line into the middle of the model, but you have no control over how deep this goes or what shape it takes. There is, however, a way to specify specific colours in specific shapes and sizes inside the model itself. So let's erase the painting on this cube for now and actually make it a white cube to make it easier to show. I'm now going to right click on the cube, go down to Add Modifier, and I'm going to select a cube, but you can select any modifier shape or collection of shapes for your purpose. Then I'm going to scale my modifier cube. I'll just shrink it down with a uniform scale for now. Then I'll turn off uniform scale and stretch out the y-axis of the modifying cube so you can now see that it is sticking out both ends of our cube body. You could also see that it has now been nested underneath the cube on the object list on the left. And this means that the modifier will only affect that one object which is nested underneath. If I then right click on our modifier cube, go to Change Filament and select another filament, again, you will see that the modifier is sticking out both sides of the cube, but as we slice it now, you'll then see that it is not sticking out the sides, but it has simply painted the faces at the points where the modifier was in contact with them. And as we go down through the layers, you'll see that the modifier has perfectly painted its volume within the cube. However, as this is just a straight shape, sometimes if you're using different materials rather than different colours of the same material, they may not fuse, and as there's nothing holding them physically in place, it can just slide out. Normally, you'd use the interlocking depth of segmented region setting here, which I covered more in a recent video and I'll link to it in the description below. But what this feature normally does is any areas that are painted with a different material, it will have interlocking lines running through it from the dominant or default material of that model. Unfortunately, it doesn't work when you're painting using modifier shapes. So the solution is effectively to manually create interlocking layers by using further modifying shapes. So to do that, I'm going to create another cube, and I'll position it roughly over where the original modifier is. I'm then going to scale this down to a smaller size than our original modifier, and I'm going to stretch it out in the opposite direction to the way that the original one runs through our model. I will then go over to the item in the object list, and you can see by default it is set to the default filament of the model. This would be the same filament that is applied to the cube itself, which is what we want, but I am going to manually apply this just to be sure with white, because that is what we're after. Obviously, because the original modifying cube is set to black, we want the interlocking lines to be the same filament that the rest of the model is printed in. And if I now slice again, you'll see that an interlocking line has been created. Not only is there an area of white running through our black modifying cube, but it is sharing the wall perimeters with the default filament of the print, so in this case white. This means it's not just printing a third small object with its own independent perimeter walls inside our black insert in our object, but it will be fused with the bulk of the model and therefore will be held in place. So that's how you can add depth information to color in Bambu Studio. Now we're going to look at how you can blend colors by defining how deep a color starts and therefore how transparent the outer layer is, causing the colors to blend with each other. For this example, I want to make the lower half of this face of the cube grey just using white and black filaments. To do that, I need to place a black area just inside the white cube, thick enough to allow 1 or 2 walls of white before it transitions, therefore making the white slightly see-through and blending with the color below, in this case black. So again, my first step is going to be right-clicking on the object and then going to add modifier, and I'm going to select a cube again. I'm now going to scale it so it's going to roughly approximate half of this cube's face, but I'll add a 1mm border around the edges of it, and I made it 2mm deep, so that should be enough to make a nice bold black area that will show up through the white. Now you'll notice when I go into move with the modifier selected, the axes are positioned in the center, and you'll notice at the top here it says world coordinates. The world coordinates for a modifier which is nested within an object is the center of the object it is nested in. So at 0, 0, 0, that is right in the center of our object cube. It's worth mentioning that if you had an object selected rather than a modifier, the world coordinates would refer to the coordinates of the print bed, not of the object itself. The origin point for this varies depending on what printer you're using, but for most, including the Bambu printers, the origin point is in the bottom left of the print plate. So what this means is if you were to set the world coordinates for an object to 0, 0, 0, it would position the center of that object in the left corner of the print plate. If we jump back to having this in the middle of the build plate now, you will see that the coordinates for this and this size build plate would then mean that the position coordinates are 125 by 125 millimeters, and then the z-axis would be half of the object's height, because the object coordinates are based on the center of the object, and 0 would be on the build plate. So back to the modifier positions now, remember that these coordinates are relative to the center of your object. If you set these and then move your object, the modifier will move relative to however the object has been moved. You don't need to adjust these again as well. If you want your exterior color to be printed thin enough to blend with the color below, bear in mind that if you're doing this on the side of your model, it is going to be relevant to your line width. If you're using a 0.4mm nozzle, the line width is by default set to 0.42mm, meaning that your gap between the outside wall and where your different color starts needs to be bigger than 0.42mm or whatever the multiple of that is you want for lines. If you wanted it to be 2 lines thick, you'd need it to be at least 0.84mm thick. So let's get our modifier changed to a different color. So let's change this to black, and then we want to slice again and see how this comes out. So with this sliced, you can see we just have a perfectly white cube on the outside. There is no visible black lines anywhere on the outside of this cube. And as we roll down through the layers of this cube, suddenly we start to see the black modifier that we have placed in there. There is only one layer between the outside wall and the beginning of the black, which means that this should become a nice grey area in our print. With the 1mm border that I added to the edges, it should be less obvious from the side faces because there is now 3 layers of white before it hits that black. Now, if you have flush to infill turned on, obviously this is flushing to infill, not the walls. So your wall perimeter between the white and the black won't be affected, and it also does not then flush to the areas you've colored with your modifier. If, however, you just wanted to block the visibility of the different colors of your infill through your outer walls, just increase the number of wall loops you've got, as they're not going to have different colors flushed into the walls, only the infill. Increasing your wall loops to 5 or 6 is going to more than ensure that you're not going to be able to see the colors of your infill through your outside walls. I hope this has helped you solve some of your painting issues. If you do have any more questions on this subject though, please pop them in the comments below and I'll reply to them as soon as I can. If you'd like to learn more about painting in Bambu Studio, make sure you keep an eye out because I have a Bambu Studio painting masterclass coming out very soon. So keep an eye out for that and make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss it. Thanks very much for sticking around. If you are in the mood for learning more, I've got a bunch of other 3D printing tutorials and just a bunch of maker videos, so check them out. Either way, thanks very much guys, and until next time, happy printing.